Convention fever grips Los Angeles. The only major threat to Kennedy's hopes is Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson.
Delegates are meeting with Kennedy right now.
Jack or Bob?
Teddy.
Christ, this place is infested.
In a surprising upset, Senator John Kennedy has won the West.
What? Hi, Jack.
You mind if I ask you a question, Lyndon?
You're out of your damn mind, Jack. All the liberals hate it.
We need Southerners.
There's no power in the vice presidency.
Power is where power goes. Guessing you Kennedys don't do a lot of deer hunting.
John Kennedy has been elected President of the United States.
I need to show a strong record on civil rights from the start.
Maybe they might listen to a Southerner who's on our side.
What makes you think he's on our side?
Well, those Kennedys must really hate you. Those Harvard boys not going to tell us how to run the state of Georgia.
You're going to lose the support of the people who've always had your back.
This train is leaving the station. You can hop on it with me and try to slow the damn thing down. If I'm gonna make a run in 68, I'm gonna need people to like me. Shut the door.
How could anybody not like him?
We've got Martin Luther King writing letters from a jail cell. It's an embarrassment around the world.
You submit this bill now, it will never become law.
What are we waiting for?
A new leader has emerged.
America has a Southern president.
You don't waste any time, do you, Lyndon?
Excuse me? Rather not have it than have it this way.
Kennedy is a man of great ideas. Now the country needs a man who can deliver.
There will be no compromise. This is about making President Kennedy's vision a reality.
This will define your presidency.
I can only hope.
Thank you.
Sirs, thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on a phenomenal film that is also a fairly patriotic film, and I mean that in the best way possible. It is a film about a real president and at a time when we had real leaders. You made this film, I think you probably started shooting it. You guys started making it a couple of years ago. It's coming out now. So what were you thinking about when you went into telling the story of LBJ? And this tells really the story of the Civil Rights Bill, as well as sort of how he decided to become vice president, and then, you know, what happened thereafter leading up to the Civil Rights Bill.
Well, I think both Woody and I had some trepidations about approaching this because I was of draft age, you know, during the Vietnam War, and Lyndon Johnson to me was like an enemy. You know, I hated the guy. You know, he could send me to my death. I didn't believe in the war, and it wasn't until you know, I spent some time in politics. I had a job in California government for a few years that I started to appreciate more of what he was able to accomplish. And I started looking into this. When I first got the script, I was like, oh, I don't know. And then I thought, okay, there's an opportunity here to tell a story about a guy who's very complex, almost a Shakespearean character, and show other sides of him than what the public normally thinks of. When you think of Lyndon Johnson, you think of a bull in the china shop. You know, he's kind of browbeating people and forcing people to do what he wants. But he had a softer side. He had a very insecure part of him. And Woody, I mean, I was lucky because Woody agreed to do it, and he brings all this great humanity to it and gives it a three-dimensional look. Plus, he's got a great sense of humor, and Lyndon Johnson had a sense of humor. So I wanted to give a more rounded picture of Lyndon Johnson, and luckily, you know, there was one person that could play it, and we got him.
Did you have any trepidation playing LBJ? Were you worried? And what was the sort of take on the character or on him that you had that really let you sink into it, get your hooks into it?
Well, I did have trepidation because of Vietnam. You know, it's hard for me to think of Lyndon Johnson. Well, for most people, that's true, without thinking about Vietnam. So, understandably, I was not, you know, when he first asked me about playing him, I was a little bit like, oh, I really got to think about this one. because there's some real moral ambiguity here, and you know. But in the end, I found him so fascinating. You know, I just started reading books and just different things about him, and listening to his phone calls, which he taped all of his phone calls. So
Did he really?
yeah, anybody here could listen to LBJ talking about a variety of subjects, and he's an amazing guy.
And tell him what he said to Nixon, who took the Oval Office.
Yeah,
he also taped all his phone calls.
Yeah, he said, make sure you tape your phone calls.
Really?
And of course, it was Nixon's undoing, so he got to get shot in on the way out the door.
Well, that's what that's the famous quote right now that Obama said to Trump going in was like, make sure you talk to your lawyers. It's like on his way out.
Yeah. Well, he sure needed to do that. So.
So you go into, you're listening to these phone calls, and for a lot of actors, I think, especially when it comes to characters that are true to life, you try to find one or two things that you can really hook into as an actor that you can kind of bring out in scenes. Did you have that, or was really the script the guiding force for you?
Well, I think that the script that Joey Hartstone wrote is a really tremendous script, and and Rob helped him and helped guide him with that too, but. I guess, more than anything, I was trying to get the voice right, because V. Neal, who was the one who did the makeup, and she brought in this young guy, Arjen, who's like, this Dutch guy who, when I met him, I thought he was like the assistant to the guy because he's so young, but he ended up being just amazing, and it really... once they got that look right, then I was real self-conscious about the way he would move or just how he would talk. Because even though we're both Texan, he's from the hill country and I'm from, suburbs of Houston. It's quite a different way of talking. And I was really obsessed with it. And Rob was just kept telling me to relax about it, And in the end, I don't think it. You watch the movie; it doesn't really matter. You don't think about those things.
A niche audience that would get the specifics of the accent differences there. I think.
Yeah,
and the problem sometimes when you do accents is the accent can overtake your performance. And what I wanted from Woody is to be able to push his natural humanity through the character. And that's what you're going to hear. I mean, you're not thinking about accent. You're thinking, did he capture the essence of who this guy was? And he did it perfectly because it was a great mixture of strength, which Johnson had, and also insecurity, which Johnson had. So he was able to play both of those things, and I think that's what makes it work.
What was it like for you guys to find humanity in not just a brilliant intelligence on the part of Lyndon Johnson, to find all these things after having gone through so much of life, painting him in your idea as this kind of one-dimensional figure of politics that led to such only disaster and calamity. And I ask this for personal reasons because there's a number of politicians at my young age that I paint that way, and I'd love to move forward with some sort of closure on them.
Well, maybe later you'll think, oh, Trump was this great.
No, never.
I don't
maybe,
think
maybe Reagan, when I'm 50, I can be like, oh, he actually was a complex person.
Well, Reagan did some good things. I mean,
yeah,
here's
but
the thing.
He did a lot of shit.
He did terrible.
Yeah.
No.
As one of the worst presidents we ever
He did some terrible. He had the Iran-Contra and everything. But whatever you want to say about him, and I was no fan of Reagan, he was a governor of California. He was the president of the Screen Actors Guild. He had some experience in government. I mean, we have a guy now who has absolutely no experience, absolutely no feel for it, and absolutely no desire to learn. And so that's the scary part. I mean, you can think about Lyndon Johnson, and he was a complex character. And if you look at his domestic agenda and take away Vietnam, which you can't do, obviously, but if you could, he goes down as one of the greatest presidents in American history. When you look at what he was able to accomplish just on a domestic front, it's unparalleled, except for maybe FDR. FDR probably did more, but then next to FDR, you've got LBJ. And so you know, he did do a lot of good. Nixon did some good things, you know. I mean, he did open the door to China. He did start the EPA. I mean, there are certain things.
Fairly good to unions at the time as well.
Well, I mean, you know, I mean, again, he was a governor. I mean, you know, he had been, you know, he had been in the Senate. He had been a vice president. I mean, you know, he was somebody. He had done something. This guy, what we have here is just, you know, it's like a nightmare you can't wake up from.
Yes. We'll get back to him in a minute. Let's.
Okay.
When we, I think I just and
let's get off of him.
I only say that because I think in regards to talking about politicians and presidents and. He's just beyond the pale. It's hard to even have a sort of historical perspective. But when you're talking about finding a new perspective on someone like LBJ and what he represents historically, does that give you clarity on how you approach other politicians that you've thought about your entire life and the complexity of their jobs?
Well, I don't think you want to approach making a movie about every politician. I think you want to look at certain people that are interesting and complex. I mean, that's why LBJ is a fascinating character. He's like Shakespearean. I mean, you know, Kennedy was Camelot, and there have been a lot of things about Kennedy, and he was like larger than life and the dream of Camelot. And we've seen stuff about Nixon because he went through what he went through with Watergate and all that. But you don't pick every president. Lincoln, everybody, you know, wants to make a movie about Abraham Lincoln because of, you know, he was president during a time when the country was at war. We broke apart. But you don't pick everybody, and you don't approach every politician to want to make a story about him. This guy is interesting because it is so ambiguous. It is so complex.
Were there parts of LBJ's life that you wish you had been able... I mean, in doing your own research, I'm sure you come up with things in his life that you wish could be part of the film, but the great thing about this film, and I think with most good biopics, is that they are about a specific sliver of life that tends to be kind of universal or represent the person as a whole, rather than trying to cover birth to death.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, obviously, we couldn't include. I know when Johnson initially met Bobby Kennedy, that was a real interesting moment.
Yeah.
I think, is it in the Caro book that it's pretty well captured?
Yeah,
you know,
but I mean,
because
they
he had been upset. Bobby was upset because LBJ had said something about his father. He said something about you know, being an appeaser during.
Oh yeah, during the Second World War.
What's his name? The Prime Minister.
Yeah, Harold Macmillan. I mean.
No.
No. No, you're talking about.
Yeah, he says he was an umbrella man for.
Yeah, and that's why they had the umbrella guy at the Kennedy, you know, at Dealey Plaza. You know, there was that famous guy with holding up the umbrella because that was the guy who appeased it. You know, what was his name? Oh, God, I'm having a total senior moment.
I had a little... I hate to have these live. I hate to have these live.
It's okay. It looks like we're real people.
It's humanity. It's humanity at work.
LBJ, in a kind of way, is reminiscent
Chamberlain.
of
Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain. Oh, my God.
I think everybody can breathe a sigh.
Oh, my God. You know how those things when you can't think of a thing and you can't move on with your life until you get that? Okay.
What about if it's late at night you can't sleep?
Oh, it's terrible. And you get that thing and okay, good. Still got the retrieval mechanism.
Your wife in the film is played by one of my favorite, if not my favorite actresses, Jennifer Jason Leigh. I think she's possibly the most courageous actress like that works in movies from the beginning of her career till now. You've worked with a lot of amazing actresses before. Had you worked with her before?
I hadn't worked with her, and I thought she was just phenomenal. She really embodied Lady Bird Johnson like. I mean, amazing. And she was always in character.
Yeah, here's what weird thing.
Talking like
I've known Jennifer since she's very, very young. She used to go with a good friend of mine, Bruno Kirby, who was not with us.
And she used to date Bruno Kirby?
A long time ago. She was very young, and I used to hang out with them. I knew her better. And I called her up to ask her to be in the movie. She loved it, wanted to do it. The first day I show up on the set, she was already in the makeup. So I never saw Jennifer. I never saw her the whole time. I only saw Lady Bird Johnson, and it wasn't until we were flying home from the film on the plane I said, "Oh, there's Jennifer." She was right in front of me. I was like, oh, yeah, that's what you look like, yeah.
Is that something that you felt that you had to do sometimes on set as well, to sort of maintain the accent, to keep the makeup on, and hold this sort of stature of character that LBJ had?
No, I mean, I don't tend to do that, but I do sometimes, you know. I sometimes will stay in character, but not usually. Usually I just pop in and out.
Think about this for a second. Woody, first of all, is the healthiest guy in the world. He eats raw vegan. He's a raw vegan, you know. I mean, basically, it's like there's no way Lyndon Johnson ever had a vegetable in his life. I mean, you know, it's steaks. It's those Texas steaks and everything.
Yeah.
So,
I only ate steak the whole time.
Broke your raw veganism.
Just steak.
The greatest 2 months of your life.
No, I'm kidding. I didn't. I'm not going to be eating meat anytime. That's just not going to happen.
You said that playing LBJ presented a kind of a moral issue for you because of how you had felt about him with Vietnam. What made you interested in sort of attacking that moral issue or digging deep into that?
Well, you know what happened is, so not long before Rob approached me, another Rob, a good friend of mine named Rob Reiner, who we used to live, actually, he was one of my first roommates here in New York. And anyway, but now he's a producer. And he had said, you got to play Lyndon Johnson, you know?
I never knew this.
I don't think I told you, yeah. And I was like, I just can't see that, dude, because I don't like him. I don't like him because of Vietnam. So he was like, you know, well, at least, you know, read a book or something. You know, so I read a book about him. I was like, yeah, he's actually pretty interesting, but I still can't see it. And then Rob came to me, said, do you want to play Lyndon Johnson? I said, well, now this is just weird. It must be.
We put the double Rob on you.
And plus, they double Rob to the second powered me. But I got to say, you know, if Rob Reiner wants you to do something, it's a very hard thing to say. You can't just dismiss that. So a lot of it had to do with, okay, I want to work with Rob so bad. I want to see if I can overcome my, you know, difficulties with that character, you know.
I lucked out. I lucked out because not only is he's brilliant in the film. I mean, it's off the charts brilliant, but the greatest working experience. I mean, you know, I said it before. I mean, if I could make every movie with Woody, I would do it. I mean, it was like the greatest pleasure, you know, to work with somebody who knows his stuff, knows what he's doing, you know, and every once in a while he gives you a yerba mate tea, and you get that. You get one of those too. No, we had a good time. We did another picture after that.
Hot or cold yerba mate? What do you go, hot or cold yerba?
I like the hot yerba.
You like the hot? Yeah. I go back and forth.
Really?
Yeah, like a latte mate type of dealio.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love about the film and your portrayal of him is at times when we're unsure of exactly where he's coming from, especially in the wake of the death of JFK, which is like, is he moving too fast? Is this because he does have these ambitions? We'll talk about sort of straddling that line and where you felt he was. I mean, just in terms of the character that you're playing, like what. Do you think he was moving too fast because of his ambitions, or do you think that was what he felt the country actually required, or a mixture of both?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because LBJ was obviously a very politically astute, hardcore, very motivated, very ambitious guy who was determined one day to be president. And when, you know, he suddenly had the presidency thrust upon him, I think there was not a certain path as regards the civil rights legislation. Now, I thought it was very brave of him to say, I'm going to take up the mantle of LBJ, and then and we're going to just, I mean, with JFK, and we're going to run with this. But also to do it in that year that he had and know that he's going to alienate the Southern Caucus and, you know, it wasn't a definitive move like this is politically expedient. Yeah. This is not just a smart political move. In fact,
he knew he was going to pay a price. He knew he was going to pay a price. He said it when he tried to pass the civil rights legislation. He said, "We're going to lose the South for a generation." It turned out it was many, many generations. But there's a scene in the movie, and it's my favorite scene, and Woody and Jennifer made a tremendous contribution, even in terms of the dialogue in that scene. It's when he has now become president, and these insecurities and doubts start to take over from him. And he comes into the bedroom, and he's got the drink in one hand and the ice cream in the other. And he sits down, and he's just all, he says, I never wanted it this way. He always wanted to be, but I didn't want it this way. He says, they love Jack, they love Bobby, they don't even like me, And he's feeling that way, and it was something we tried to get into the movie, this feeling of insecurity and feeling of not being loved, which he had as a young boy growing up. And through the strength that he gets from Lady Bird, she helps, bolster him to the point where he goes, okay. He then gets off the dime and says, okay. And then his skills kick in, and he says, and that's when he becomes the president. There's two moments. One, when he hears that Kennedy died, and he stands up in the hospital room and starts giving orders of what needs to be done. And the second is when he decides, I'm going to go after this civil rights bill. And that moment Woody's incredible in it, Jennifer's incredible in it, and we worked on that scene over and over and over. Went through a lot of different variations on it, and we got contribution from Woody and from Jennifer, and that's what makes that scene great.
I love that you brought the ice cream into that scene. As silly as a thing that is, I laughed so hard, and I was so touched by that you allowed a really weird human moment inside a historical piece like this. Normally movies, they'd be like, oh, that looks too
No,
awesome.
He's trying to comfort himself with all the tools he has.
Needed a little comfort food at that moment.
Yeah. Well, he's got the booze, and he's got the ice cream.
You mentioned this idea, though, that his need to be loved, that he had this insecurity around it, and I think that goes back to one of my first questions for you, Woody. It was what did you hook into for this character? Because so many of the scenes, especially with the Kennedys, are played from this perspective of LBJ, really wanting validation, approval, and love from these guys who are so much younger than him and have so much less experience than him in politics. So he really has to kind of kiss the ring in some ways for a couple of guys that he has a certain amount of I don't say little respect for, but definitely feels like he's more qualified then and better suited for the job.
Yeah, I think he was that was one of the things that drove him absolutely bananas, that these young bucks have come up and kind of usurped what should have been his ascendancy to the throne, because he didn't declare as soon as he should have, and the Kennedys shored up all the western states and a lot of the electoral votes they needed. They already had, what do you call them?
The delegates.
The delegates already kind of had them in their hand, and so he might have been president in that. He might have won that election in 1960. But there's no way to know, because Joe Kennedy was a pretty powerful force too, but so I think that made him even more insecure, and he went from being the second most powerful guy in Washington when he was the Senate Majority Leader to suddenly he's getting ridiculed by these, the college roommates of
Bobby Kennedy
the Kennedys. Yeah, I mean, it just drove him crazy. So before he became president, he was really having a tough go of it,
And one of the things that I loved about the film as well is that we rarely get to see it is the legislative process. And we're seeing more and more movies, I think, in the past few years, two come to mind, really, which is this and Lincoln, where people are almost nostalgic for this old school legislative process that it really feels like in a lot of ways we've lost, be it with the monster in office that is in office right now, or not him. It seems like we've lost a fair amount of the sort of bipartisan deal-making and process-making between
Well,
people.
it's the way government is supposed to work. But in order for that to happen, you need, there's an old expression, a fish stinks from the head, You need a leader, whether it's a Senate leader or the President of the United States, to really understand the nexus between government, policy, and politics, and how all that works, and to be steeped in it enough and be knowledgeable enough how to move an agenda forward. And it takes a lot of talent, and LBJ was the most gifted at all of understanding the intersection of those things. So we haven't had that in a while. I think Bill Clinton certainly had that. He understood it, but we haven't seen that. Certainly, we don't see it now.
I think So we'll go to questions. I think Obama could have had that. I think he was just faced with a sort of authoritarian-leaning Republican Party.
I think Obama had the problem, and I hate to say this, but he was an African American, and that was a great thing to become a president the first time. But I think there were a lot of people that were very angry, and they were going to do anything to thwart anything he did. And when you think about what he was able to accomplish with everybody against him, it's astounding how much he was able to accomplish. But, you know, how about never in the history of America have we had a president who puts a nominee, a middle-of-the-road nominee up for the Supreme Court and doesn't even get a hearing? And, you know, they give Trump credit for getting Gorsuch. It wasn't Trump that gets the credit. It's Mitch McConnell, who sat on Merrick Garland for a whole year. So they were trying to thwart Obama at every step of the way, and yet he was able to save the auto industry. He was able to pass a health care bill. He was able to kill bin Laden.
17 million jobs.
Many jobs. The country dug us out of the worst recession since the Great Depression. But I do believe there was a backlash to the fact that it was the first African American, and you found a guy comes along and starts delegitimizing him with the birther stuff, and he unearths all this racism that's underneath, that's bubbles up to the surface. He gives it a voice, and that's why I think this movie is important now, because it's about racial tension, and it's about, listen, a lot of movies have been made about race relations, but all of a sudden, it's now right back up at the surface again. And here's Lyndon Johnson fighting for racial harmony. And so it works. The movie works from that standpoint, you know?
Yeah. I'm being told that I have to go to questions, but I'm going to break rules and ask you one more political question, and I apologize.
Maybe they have political.
And then they'll get their chance. Yeah. Do you think it's possible to have bipartisan deal-making in this country as in the wake of the country being brainwashed by Fox News? I mean, it is just a different political environment since Bill Clinton.
Yes.
And Fox News really, really helps maintain and run a lot of this.
And it's not just Fox News. I mean, Fox News is on one side, and, you know, you have MSNBC on the other. But you also have the invasion of Russian, you know, influence and propaganda that has wormed its way into our body politic, and that is very difficult. It's very difficult for real news to break through when you have all this propaganda being thrown out there, and then you have the President of the United States also calling mainstream media fake news. So that's, to me, the biggest problem. But I do believe, I have confidence that with the right leader, we can get back to bringing both sides together.
Okay, you guys, go ahead. Who's got a question? Right here.
Hi, my name is Joe, and first off, I just want to say I'm a big fan of both of your work. Mr. Harrelson, you were really incredible in War for the Planet of the Apes. And
thank you.
No problem. And
another great movie this year. A lot of great movies this year.
And Mr. Reiner, thank you so much for When Harry Met Sally. It's honestly one of my all-time favorite movies.
Okay. Thanks.
And as a film major, I learned so much from it. And that being said, why do you think that Harry and Sally are still cinema's go-to couple 30 years later?
You know, I don't know. All I know is that if you go down to Katz's Deli, you can sit at the table where Sally faked the orgasm. And from what I understand, people act out that scene right at that table. And the people just sit there and they let it happen. I saw somebody on YouTube. I saw it on YouTube. They had a flash mob, and every woman in the restaurant, the place was filled. All the women were faking orgasms, and all the guys were standing there like that. And so they you know. But I don't. To answer your question, I don't know. I'll have what she said.
That's my kind of flash mob.
Yeah.
Next question.
Hi, this is for both of you. How do you see LBJ now after you've done the movie and gone in character and read up on him? Do you see him differently than you did beforehand?
Well, I see him differently, not from having done the movie, but just having lived life since I was a young person of Vietnam age. I do see him differently in that I see him in a more complex way. You can't get past the fact that there was Vietnam, and that was a bad foreign policy disaster. But he's much more complex and much more interesting to me than the way I initially thought of him.
I think we have time for one more question, right here.
Hey, Woody, huge fan. So it was announced earlier this year that White Men Can't Jump is going to see a reboot, like it's in the works. And I was wondering if there's a chance you might reprise that role, even a small cameo, perhaps.
Oh, no. No, I think that's really cool they're doing that. But, I mean, yeah. Can't see reprising that role or even...
You think he couldn't jump before?
Yeah.
You should see.
Now the jumping less. No, I mean, I'm glad they're doing it, and I hope it's great. Hell, I hope it's better than the original. But I can't see going down there and getting down in Venice and pumping up my sneakers.
Right, you didn't have Nike pumps in that one.
We had the pumps.
Guys, we got to wrap up, but I just, what do you hope people take away from learning about LBJ in this film?
Well, I hope they look at how government is supposed to work, and that they can get a sense of the ideal of how we are supposed to work as Republicans and Democrats, and how to get things done. I mean, it would be nice to believe that we could reconnect with the way a democracy is supposed to work. So hopefully people will be inspired by it.
And, you know, he did so many great things, you know, with the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Medicaid, Medicare, a lot of environmental legislation, the war on poverty. I mean, he really was a forward-thinking, progressive president who did a lot of great stuff. So it's nice as an example of what can be done by this the executive branch. I don't know that we're going to see any of that anytime soon.
Maybe not in the near future, but hopefully at some point.
Guys, thank you so much for being here. LBJ is in theaters November 3rd. Rob Reiner, Woody Harrelson. Thanks, guys.